All right, let's take a look at what we got going on today. My inclusion criteria are less than $40. Medium to large size blade, branded, so no clones, sheath and handle scales included, outdoor use, and in stock. Exclusion criteria on the right hand side. You can pause the video and look at those if you'd like. And here they are, the wieners we found to run through our gauntlet of tests. I'm excited. So as usual, I'm measuring the knife's factory sharpening angle while I polish their edges to 2000 grit. I've checked their behind the edge thickness and removed handles and coating when necessary to check their hardness. I take the average of 3 readings, rounding to the closest whole number, and that's what you'll see on the screen. First up is the D2 steel KHU, which costs $26.99. It has a 3/16 inch wide spine and saber ground blade. I measured the HRC at 56, so this is probably not D2 steel, and if it is wasted at this low in HRC. The all-inclusive angle is a nice slicey 36 degrees with 35 thou behind the edge thickness. The knife alone weighs 7.5 ounces. Next up is the Eafengrow EF127 in 14C28 in steel, coming in at $39.99. This 5.1 inch destroyer of worlds has a 0.13 inch spine, hollow grind, and titanium coating. The edge is a beefy 46 degrees with 45 thou behind the edge thickness. The HRC on mine is 59. By itself, this knife weighs 9.2 ounces on my scale. The Eafengrow EF130 is made from DC53 steel, according to Eafengrow, and sells for $39.99. We have a 4.7 inch blade just over 1/8 inch thick with a hollow grind. The edge angle is 42 degrees with a sort of wandering 30 to 40 thou behind the edge. Advertised HRC is 60 to 62. I clock mine at 58. Weight is 8 ounces. And finally, the BPS Savage is made in Ukraine and costs $39.99. This 4.5 inch blade is less than 1/8 inch thick with a full flat grind. It has a wide 46 degree all-inclusive edge angle on a very thin 15 thou edge thickness. The knife and sheath together weigh 8 ounces. Quickly through fit and finish, the edge and spine on the KHU are straight, the grind lines are clean, everything is flush and symmetric. The sheath has a Tech-Lock style attachment system and it locks up well. Everything on the EF127 is flush. The fasteners look great, but they protrude a little bit. The edge and spine are straight. The finish appears uniform, but is worn off where the aluminum clamps for my sharpener were applied. The sheath also has a Tech-Lock style attachment with a drain hole at the bottom. EF130 is similarly flush and lined up. The handles are comfortable. The fasteners protrude again. The bevel angle is not consistent side to side or front to back, and the spine and edge are straight. The finish is worn off again where the aluminum clamps for my sharpener were applied. The Tech-Lock style sheath attachment and the sheath look good. Next, the BPS Savage has a few issues. The knife has a grinder belt finish with no bluing or coating, which is fine. The tang protrudes past the handles just a hair along the spine and belly of the handle, but it isn't enough to cause hot spots. There's a little grinder bump on the spine. Technically, this is a defect. The handles are flush, but there are a few rough spots behind the ricasso where more sanding is needed. The sheath is thick leather with a whelp, single stitching, and a rivet. No retention strap. All right, let's circle back to ergonomics and design. The KHU upswept drop point blade is attractive and the jimping is unobtrusive. Unfortunately, the handle is only 3 7/8 inch at the spine and 3 1/4 inch at the belly. It is not a full-size handle. In my opinion, this knife weighs too much to be an EDC and it weighs too much not to have a full-sized handle. Eafengrow 127, the jimping feels a little bit sharp. There's jimping at the butt of the handle. For reasons completely unknown, the tang does protrude from the handles, but it is chamfered, making it slightly more comfortable than it otherwise would be. Note that the spine of the blade is also chamfered, so it may be a Pharaoh no-go. There's a silly hole in the blade, but then again, thank goodness it is there. This knife would be even heavier. There's some creative styling elements here, and the excess weight of this knife is bothersome. On the EF130, there's a finger choil at the heel of the blade that feels a little small, and choking up into it puts my thumb squarely on the point of the thumb ramp. This knife also feels heavier than it should. At 4 inches, the handle is a little short. If I'm choked up into the finger choil, the length is perfect, but in a regular grip, things feel a little cramped. I wish there were another 1/4 to 3/8 inch on the butt, basically. For the BPS Savage, it has a lovely profile. The blade is quite thin and the bevel is thin behind the edge. It's more like a kitchen knife than an outdoors knife. The full flat grind means the blade slowly tapers towards the tip. The handles are quite comfortable, but maybe a little small if one gets into heavier tasks. I don't know why it has a lanyard hole. It's not going to do any serious chopping. Plus the narrow spine and full flat grind say I get stuck in wood. Here are the knives naked. You can see the KHU and the EF130 have no skeletonization, which is one reason they're so heavy. The EF127 has very little skeletonization, also heavy. Here's a scorecard so far. For fit and finish, the KU is put together well, as are the Eafengrows, but they were discounted for their blade coating sort of wearing off while sharpening. The BPS Savage gets a low score from the unscented area on the handles, and the grinder bump sort of, but I'm confident this company would have taken care of that had I time to let them know. As for ergonomics, the design of the KHU is too heavy, and the unskeletized 3/16" handles too thick to make any sense whatsoever. The Eafengrow's unnecessary cosmetic features, thumb ramp placement, weight, and short handle in the case of the 130 land them at a 5 out of 10. The Savage looks a little better, but it's a little thin. In the sheath drop test, we drop each unit from hip height onto concrete 25 times to see if the sheath breaks or the knife dislodges. Heavier knives tend to have a little bit harder time with this test. Super tight. Very tight. BPS Savage. The KHU did well, the sheath looks great, and it still retains the knife. EF127 lost the knife 4 times, but still functions. The EF130 sheath ejected the knife 13 out of 18 times, and no longer works. The BPS sheath functioned flawlessly, it's in good shape. The knife was driven down into the whelp a little bit, but that's to be expected. Here are those scores. Again, we only did 18 drops with the EF130 because the knife was being damaged from being ejected so often. We're starting to ding up the tip and stuff. Here we go, 25 strikes per side with the ball peen hammer. We're not swinging for the fences. We're just trying to make sure it holds up to reasonable impacts. So 25 per side. Here we go, KHU. Nice and tough. BPS 27. KHU handles did very well. Minor marking. Eafengrow 127. Minor marking. Still did really good. Eafengrow 130. Catastrophic failure on one side. This is I think this is a micarta handle, yeah. BPS knife, we got a split on this side. Maybe one starting on this side. Yep, the EF130 and the BPS Savage handles broke. You'll have to decide how important this test is to you. I don't subject my knives to that much stress, but people do want tough gear and tough knife handles, so. In the edge retention test, we cut through this 1-inch hemp rope until either the knife snags on paper or can no longer cut the rope. A lower edge angle and thinner behind the edge thickness generally benefit this test. We'll talk a little more about that later. Eafengrow 127. Pretty flippin' sharp, man. Okay. That's a half cut. I'm tapping out on that. I just want to see if it cuts paper. Test is over though. I can't keep going. Yeah, all right. Doesn't matter what it does to paper. It can't cut rope. So. 3/4 of a cut, I guess. Yeah, okay, it's done. BPS. Yeah, I'm gonna stop it there. It's like 2.5 or something. Yeah, the edge is just it's fine, but it's just not doing anything against this rope. Yeah. Yeah, shaving no hairs. So it's just that thin behind the edge that's propelling it through the paper. So despite a very low HRC, relatively speaking, the low edge angle, bevel angle of the KHU got it through the rope 5 times. Now that is still substandard. I made a 1095 knife with a pretty slicey geometry a couple weeks ago that went through the rope 9.75 times. So here I'm going to baton against the grain in an effort to check edge impact durability in a repeatable way. We don't want to see chipping. Eventually we do expect to see rolling and dimpling and all that. We want the edge to remain sharp for a significant amount of use. Do I baton my knives? I don't, but some people do. The boards here are dried cedar, by the way. The 3/4? 3/4? Two and a half. It's catching right there. There's a ding. Yeah. So I'm going to call that a 3. It's after 10. Will it shave hairs? You know what? That's actually taking about half the hairs. Yeah, that's crazy. It's still taking down half the hairs. I don't have any more wood, so we're stopping at 10. I know it's still cutting paper, but this is right after that test. There's some significant dings and chips in this blade. Here we can get a look at all the edges and see how they held up. The EF127 edge, with the exception of a few spots, looks okay. I'm surprised it stopped that early. Clear winner here, obviously the Savage. Hey, has anyone seen my balls? Oh, there they are. These are 1.5 inch diameter 52-100 steel. One weighs 7.9 ounces. The other is welded to a steel rod, which together weighs 22.4 ounces. They are dropped through this 5-foot tube onto the edge of the blade to check for chipping or fractures. We do expect deformation. Every knife should deform here. That's okay. All right, the KHU, it held up pretty well to my balls. The EF127 also did pretty good. EF130 did very well, interestingly enough. So the BPS knife, chipped out. That's a little bit disappointing. 1066 steel, this HRC. I would not have expected that. But it is a very thin knife, so it doesn't have much to reinforce itself with. And then I think if you look at the grain here, there's some issues. So that is a bit of a chunky grain. It's not terrible. I've seen worse, but it's really not good either. It doesn't have that fine, silky microstructure that we want to see. So I think it's possible that there's some heat treat issues here. All of the knives did well except the BPS, which only survived with a smaller ball. Tip retention is self-explanatory here. I'll stab the knives 5 times into the end of a 2x4 in the vise and pry it out. If the tip lands in a previous stab hole, I redo it. Alright, so as expected, the knives that have the grinds that support their tips didn't break or bend. The BPS knife tip did bend, but it didn't break, and that's what we wanted to see. We did not want to see breaking, which is good. Alright, the following are only my opinions. The KHU has the blade length and the weight of a full-size knife, but the handle of an EDC. It tested 56 HRC. It either isn't actual D2 or is heat treated very poorly, and it doesn't matter that it scored last in batoning or that it scored first in the rope cut. Even at $27, this one is just a dud for me. The Eafengrow EF127 has questionable styling and is unreasonably heavy. It has poor edge retention with both cutting and impacts as seen in the baton against the grain test. It held up well to moderate abuse and the sheath function was passable, but I expected more out of 14C28N. The Eafengrow 130 is also heavy and has enough design issues to put me off personally. The fact that it springs from its sheath more often than it is retained when dropped from hip height, and it has miserable edge retention in the rope cut, is just pure donkey. By the way, let me show you something. If I change the bevel angle on this knife from its factory 42 degrees down to 34 degrees, it cuts rope 6.75 times. That is a very modest result, but acceptable in this price range. The point is the factory set angle is a design flaw. This improvement would be something to consider if it weren't for the knife's weight and ejection seat enabled sheath. The BPS Savage's fit and finish get a pass in my final assessment because I was unable to give the company a chance to replace the knife due to time constraints. Its ergonomics are the best in this group, but its lightweight design, thin spine, and thin behind the edge thickness combined with what looks to me to be sort of a sketchy heat treatment mean it may not be as tough as some need for an outdoors knife, even if its edge held up well to batoning against the grain. Its full, flat, thin blade are likely a detriment to batoning with the grain to split wood. That's okay with me personally. I just don't do a lot of that. But its rope cut edge retention is just too poor even in this price range. Maybe put a 30-degree bevel on it and use it in your kitchen if you have to have one of these. Here is me requenching the BPS Savage from 1475 degrees Fahrenheit just once. I didn't thermal cycle it or anything. And when we check the grain, you can see the difference. I'll just let the image do the talking. So which one of these knives would I recommend? Well, this group is a bit of a disaster, and I wouldn't recommend any of these, to be honest. None of them are for me at any rate. If you want to see some better options, go check out the first video on sub $40 fixed blades. You guys have a good one, and thanks for watching.